Welcome to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans.
This is Lisa Pesnichak.
And I'm Sara Beckner, and we're here to deep dive into the fascinating world of astrology.
We offer monthly forecasts based on the new moon charts looking at world astrology,
using both neoclassical and Uranian astrology techniques.
In addition to the forecasts, we offer blind chart readings, interviews with notable guests, and much more.
So keep listening as we bring you Insight for Humans. Hello, we are so happy to be with you today. I've been really looking forward to this episode because, number one, it just feels like it's been a while, Lisa, since we've sat down and talked astrology. And I'm looking forward to it because this is going to be a bit more conversational. Today's program is a bit of an ode to Uranus. And so we're just going to touch on it from lots of different angles, just talk about how it functions, some of the ways we think about it, how we've seen it show up in cycles and seasons and in some case histories and personal lives. So it should be a fun conversation. So to start us off, let's just go over the basics, Lisa. We know that Uranus transits the solar system. It takes about 84 years. So that means it's in a sign for roughly 7 years. And right now it's sitting at 25 degrees Taurus. And then we have Algol, the fixed star that's associated with Medusa, and the craziness of Medusa is at 26 degrees. So we have Uranus approaching Algol, which is kind of interesting. And then it'll be moving into Gemini next year in July 7th. And so that tells you a little bit about how it's functioning in the sky right now.
Yeah, and it's been in Taurus for, oh my gosh, when did it ingress into Taurus? Well, first I'll say that one of the interesting things about Uranus when thinking about your own life is that we have universal Uranus transits. The first one that we have is called the Uranus square Uranus. And we have that around age 21, 22. So you think of the independence, you're catapulting yourself out of the nest, you're throwing yourself in the world and saying, here I am, world. And it's a time when you're really experimenting and taking chances and trying all the different jobs and living in all the different places, maybe dating all the different people. A lot of that depends on where your Uranus is placed and how it's aspected and that sort of thing. But one thing for sure is that when you have these strong Uranus transits, life gets more exciting for better or worse. And then the next big transit that we have is the Uranus opposition. And we have that around age 42 to 44. And again, very similar. This is the quintessential midlife crises transit where people leave the mundane, stuck parts of their life and go do something exciting. Sometimes people go get a sports car or whatever. But that's the kind of symbology. And then finally, you have your Uranus return around age 84 to 88. And I always think of older people who are like, screw it. I don't care what you think of me anymore. There's actually this shedding of all of the expectations of the world at that point, and where you just get to, for better or worse, completely be yourself. So
yeah, just hearing you talk about those cycles makes me think, what is the developmental pressure that we receive at these moments in life? And to me, it's definitely about coming into greater authenticity within yourself, but it's also pushing you. At 21, you're separating from the family of origin and launching your life. And then conversely, in midlife, in many cases, the dynamic in families is shifting again. Kids are leaving home, things are changing. And so it's another push to liberate ourselves in some way and come into a greater level of authentic being to propel us into that next great chapter. And then I suppose at the end at 84, it's just, you're signing off. I mean, you're shedding the things of the earthly plane. The meaning making is not really happening anymore so much around the life you built. It's a time to start to let some of that go. And we sort of jumped off the deep end. We didn't even talk about, just in a general sense, the basic, what does Uranus mean? What does it stand for? And where do these ideas come from? And I'm wondering if a good way to start that would be just talking a little bit about the origin stories and the myths. Do you want to take us?
Yes. And before I jump into that, there's a really interesting relationship between Saturn and Uranus. Saturn is the last planet that we're able to see with our naked eye. It's a planet of stability and tradition and consistency, where Uranus is in a response to that. The myth, I think, really explains that. Uranus means God and father of the sky by the Titans. So it's the sky, his partner was Gaia of the earth, really beautiful pairing of sky and earth. And interestingly, Uranus's or Uranus by the Greek name was castrated by his son Kronos, who's also known as Saturn. So here we have this relationship between Saturn and Uranus. There's a relationship between the two of them that's very dynamic. And with this castration, the Titans are freed, which is another very key word to Uranus. And the sky is fixed. So here we still have the sky. And also Uranus in many ways is attributed to astrologers and the sky that we study and the constellations. And that's as far as I really want to go into this myth. But I just wanted to point to this tension between the tradition and the idea of freedom and how it's a little bit blurred sometimes. And I remember when we were having the Saturn Uranus squares a couple years ago, that you could really feel that tension between the traditions trying to hold on and the revolutionary powers coming through to create something that's new. And there's this dance between Saturn and Uranus, between what's fixed and what's dependable and what's throwing that out because it's not useful anymore. The regeneration of life. Uranus is there to regenerate life in order to help humans to evolve. There's a revolutionary core to Uranus, and it wants us to survive. And that's part of its relationship to Saturn as well. But also, Saturn or the tradition needs Uranus or the new ideas and inspiration to knock it out of its patterns in order to be more fruitful.
It's the yin and the yang of growth and transformation drive. It's funny because as you're talking, I'm a visual artist. And one of the things that's recommended if you get stuck is to give yourself constraints. So a lot of people, like painters, they'll be like, oh, okay, I'm flatlining, I'm in a place, I don't know where to go. Okay, well, try to do a painting with 3 colors. Or you'll give yourself some artificial constraints in order to allow for some level of innovation.
That's very
Saturn
cool.
Uranus.
It
Which,
is.
by the way, I saw Uranus in the sky last week. It is visible with the naked eye. I had to confirm this with my husband and I were out with the astronomy apps. You have to really be looking. And I'm living in the high desert of Western
Yeah.
Colorado, and the moon have not risen yet. But yeah, you can just barely see it. So it just reminds me of that seeking part of us wants to stretch us and grow.
Yeah.
And inventiveness, individuality, freedom, the quest for liberation. All of these things are very Uranian ideals.
Yeah. Which struck by lightning.
Yes. Flashes of insight, being struck by lightning, winning the lottery, really.
Yes.
And we know that after Uranus moves into Gemini, we're going to have some, what did you decide, Lisa? Like 5 times we're going to have exact squares, Uranus, Pluto. Trines.
Yeah, we have this beautiful trine between Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. And we have these from July 2026 up until May 2028. So pretty cool. I mean, we all knew this Pluto ingress into Aquarius, that there was going to be some technological innovations that are very prominent just because of the symbology. And I think that this trine that's happening is really going to facilitate the innovations that we're expecting and also not expecting, because that's very Uranus. And it's also very air, where you're having ideas that you hadn't thought of before. And the last time that we had this alignment was in 1922. So this is a very special alignment that's happening. See what you have in early fixed signs, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, and take advantage of this inspiring, powerful energy that's going to be available. I mean, it's not for a little bit, but just put it on your plate. And even though you might have a lot of these hard Pluto and in the next couple of months, Pluto Mars stuff happening in early fixed signs, maybe have some proactive plans. How can I work this pressure in a way that I'm setting myself up to be available for the innovation that's going to be flowing in the future?
Absolutely. And there's going to be some of that we don't even see coming. Um,
Most of it, we're not going
Most of it
to.
in cosmobiology, looking at the planetary pairs, this is a classic planetary pair for sudden abnormalities and mutations. But here we see it in a trine, mutations that ultimately, yes, can lead to innovation or can spur something beneficial and new. I'll be interested to see what emerges under these transits.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what we've seen with Uranus and Taurus? It first ingressed in 2018 and had its final ingress in 2019, and what we've seen most prevalently in that time.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you because my husband and I decided for a stint to be farmers with very little preparation and no experience whatsoever. And I can tell you that in the agriculture industry, things have really changed in this time with Uranus and Taurus.
Yes.
The way we grow, the methods of growing, all of the aquaponics really started to rise in prevalent. It certainly was happening before, but not on the scale it is now. So that's an interesting thing because I think about Taurus as the materials and on the ground, what we're doing with the earth, the systems, and the shakeups that have occurred on that level.
Yes. I was really thinking of post pandemic and even during the pandemic, the supply chain interruptions
Totally.
and how we're still being impacted by that. And I think part of the economic problems that we're having is reverberations from the pandemic. I am no economist by any means, but there were some really core disturbances both to our supply chain and in our economic world in general. There were shakeups and disturbances that we're still trying to ease up. We're not in the high wave of it, but if you think about a wave and a ripple, we're at the outer ripples where we're still trying to stabilize ourselves after that time. And because of the work that I've done on the election, I think that that was largely Uranus and Taurus. Taurus likes the things that are familiar. Taurus likes the things that comfort us, and also a focus on finances too. And also the availability of goods, which prices have gone up, which is what I was just speaking to, and how that really drove this election and just where people's minds were at. And people were really willing to, eyes wide open, vote for immense change and disruption. And I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but that definitely is what people voted for and where people's values were at. If you take the black and whiteness out of it, that's what people were voting for. They wanted a jackhammer to come in, a demolition crew to come into the government and knock it out. And a lot of that was inspired because of this destabilization of the economy.
Yes. People want a revolution. That's
I
what I
do.
learned watching the outcome of the election. People want a revolution. And as Taurus approaches Algol and watching as Trump starts to form his administration and the choices that are being made, they are all a little out of the box. They're people who have not functioned or served in their roles in a traditional way. They're all entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
They're all
Yeah.
people doing their careers differently. And what's going to happen when we put them all together for the next 4 years? We don't know. But some of what you're talking about, Lisa, as far as transportation and all of that, I think will continue to be an issue as Uranus moves into Gemini, because all of those things around transportation, communication
It's gonna
carry on.
and it's I think it's
Uh,
no mistake that it's this wave of Uranus and Taurus issues that have now brought in this new administration that's going to then possibly alter laws and the way that we experience government in general, as well as use social media. So many other things that we probably can't even think of, transportation as well. I mean, we have Elon Musk in a governmental role and he owns Tesla and SpaceX. So that can only mean things that are far from the regular person's imagination at this point.
yeah. I think about AI,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
with the Uranus Pluto, because sudden abnormalities and mutations. What if the machinery, what if the technology starts to function in ways we can't predict or we don't anticipate or aren't built into the model?
And with a
Um,
trine, there's not going to be any checks or balances on it. That's what happens with a trine. All the doors are open, free to spread abnormal information. And technology going to have a really powerful effect on the way that we live our lives. I'm really interested in how and when it's going to really start to impact our day-to-day lives. I guess we'll see as we move forward, and it's going to be interesting, that's for sure.
this might be a good time to bring up the Sibley chart since we're talking about
All
the
right.
Sailor
Good.
Nation, is how Uranus was built into our natal story as a country.
So
It's a
this
good
is
thing.
the Sibley chart, and let me see where it ends next. Okay. So this is what we're looking at here most prominently is this Uranus and the descendant. And it's arguably the most angular planet in the chart. And it Uranus, as we spoke about, signifies revolutionary interest in the future, a foresight into the future, freedom fighting revolutionists, which could be redundant to what I just said. But if you think about Americans, it's very much the way that Americans experience themselves or ourselves as a country much differently than other countries. Once you become a young adult, you move away from your family. You're independent. You're not part of that family structure. So much emphasis is put on the independent person and how you can step out into the world and make a difference in your own individual way. The United States is also known for being more technologically advanced and taking more risks, and also maybe being an unstable, in some ways, a freewheeling partner to other countries where they have to depend on us and we get to dictate the way that things go, for better,
Mhm.
for worse. I know that we have not always been the best in our international relations, but we won't get into that.
And part of that is because we don't play by the rules. And this whole country was founded in response to overcoming tyranny of feudal systems and
Exactly.
coming in with this idea of every man for himself, we're all equal. And,
Mhm.
you know, Lisa, in the kind of astrology we've studied, we know that if Uranus shows up in certain places in the chart, it's a strong indication of entrepreneurship. But
Mhm.
here in the Sibley chart, it's saying as a country, as a people, this idea that we can forge our own way, that we can create our own jobs, that we can establish something for ourselves, it was pretty novel at the time, because
Mhm.
historically you came from the bakers, 5 generations of bakers. It's the blessings and the curse, and the blessing and the curse that comes with a strong, like you said, it's an angular, strong angular placement. We get all of that freedom at what cost? And maybe that's what's happening right now with this election. And maybe things have gotten too stagnant or too Saturnian for people.
Mhm.
There's this impulse coming up through the people to shake it up again, break it down, shake it up.
Yeah, and by transit, we have transiting Uranus right now, squaring the United States moon right here. So I think that is pretty prominent as well.
And also, eventually,
The Uranus return happens a little later on. I need to double check, but I think in like 2026, 2026 until about 2029, we're going to have some pretty interesting transits where we're going to have Uranus first hitting the natal Uranus with a Uranus return, which is going to be a big deal. And then we're going to have Uranus reaching the descendant, which is going to be a big deal. And then Uranus is going to reach this Mars, which is going to be another big deal.
so this makes me want to segue into my personal experience because when I saw Uranus approaching my ascendant, I had that same little feeling that I have right now, seeing this in the Sibley chart, which is, oh my gosh, this looks really unstable. And that's a little
Hmm.
scary. And so I do want to speak a little bit to that because I was trying to prepare myself in many ways for the worst.
Hmm.
And it it really hasn't shown up as cataclysmic. In some ways, it has been this thing that's emerging. And part of that is very creative and alive. And part of that feels like it's made um, me more of a divergent thinker.
Mm.
And in that divergent thinking, it's harder for me in many ways to figure out what I want to focus on. And we know that Uranus rules the sympathetic nervous system as well. And thinking that the stirrings, the insight, the creativity, and also the anxiety and lack of focus that can come with not knowing how to channel that. And
Mhm.
all the while, this thing is emerging that is changing and shifting the face of how I show in the world, my life. I am emerging as this other thing that I couldn't have even seen coming.
Mhm.
And it's been an exciting and enjoyable time. And so I just don't want to get totally fear based about seeing this in the Sibley chart because a lot of good can come of it. And sometimes we're talking about cycles, especially with Uranus taking 84 years to transit the sun. I think, especially in a dopamine nation where we have instant everything right now, we think of these things as more immediate and sudden. And yes, they are, but they're slower cycles too. The emerging can come and it leaves breadcrumbs for us in a lot of ways. Things are shifting. You don't know what to expect. I can even feel it in my daily life, just in terms of appointments and plans and how I
Mhm.
structure things with people that I can't really depend on a day to look like what I think it's going to look like.
Mhm.
But that's not bad. You know what I
No,
mean?
it
Because
opens up other doors.
yes, and Uranus rules electricity. There is a certain kind of flow accessible and available that allows me to navigate some of that in a way that I enjoy.
I love that. I think that's definitely true. We should clarify that you also have Jupiter conjunct your ascendant.
I'm sure people can hear it.
So that kind of tempers that to some degree, which is amazing. And you're able to absorb it and bounce with it and go with it. I will say that with the Sibley chart, at the time that the US separated from Europe, from the king, that was a revolutionary time. That was a time when they were not doing this anymore. They put their foot down. They said, we're are going to be our own sovereign nation from the king. No more king. We are for the people. And what's interesting is that around the time that was really revving up was around the time when Uranus went into Gemini, when it ingressed into Gemini in 1774 to 1775. This chart is 1776. So in those couple years leading up, there
Mm.
tends to be this building up of we're going to be free and independent. This happens every 84 years. We're a young country. Then the next Uranus return after that one, Uranus entered Gemini between 1858, 1859. And the Civil War took place from 1861 to 1865. So during that whole time, so there was big change in the United States that needed to take place again, which was very jolting to the United States as a whole and changed many things that we're not going to get into right now. But then the next time that Uranus entered Gemini between 1941 to 1942 is when we had World War II and we got pulled into that war. We've only had two of these Uranus returns so far since the country's been founded. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we're going to get pulled into. The placement of Uranus does tend to pull us towards other nations or some element of other within the nation itself and working with that. But I do think that we can, on some level, predict that there will be some substantial change within the United States.
I agree with you. And if I were to try to take that onto a personal level and get out of my chart since I'm buffered by Jupiter, but just think about the clients that I've seen. I have seen the Uranus opposition in the early to mid 40s be more earth shattering in the sense of that need to liberate something, that need to like shake up one's life can be so
Yeah.
overpowering that I have seen it destroy families. I've seen a lot of
Yeah.
divorce at that time. I've seen a lot of people make some pretty radical changes in their lives, for sure.
And changes that probably in the long term end up being very beneficial and they're probably glad that they did. But at the time, it feels a little rash. It feels like this guttural reaction to circumstances that you have to be liberated from. Otherwise, you're getting suffocated by the circumstances in your life. Another way is to take chances that you've never let yourself take before. And that doesn't necessarily have to be disruptive on the same level. There's all different variances and ways that it can play out. I think when I just had my Uranus opposition a couple years ago, it was quite nice. I think I took some chances with my business and probably put more stuff out as far as content and website and that sort of thing. But definitely was more inspiring for me. My Uranus is quite lovely in my chart. I don't have a hard time, but I am right now having Uranus square my natal Saturn, and that's feeling pretty disruptive. And I'm not enjoying that at all.
Yeah.
Speaking of bringing it back full circle to the Saturn Uranus relationship and how they work together, and just looking at where the areas that you're stuck and where do you have to change.
Yeah. which is that relationship shows up in how we look at Aquarius, because the modern ruler of Aquarius is Uranus, the traditional ruler is Saturn. They're very
Mhm.
contrary forces. How did this
Yeah.
end up being what
Yeah,
it
it's
is?
it's a really hard one to wrap your head
Yeah.
around. So
I had a client this week tell me that in work, she's very Saturnian. She likes measured pace, steady progress. She likes to work Saturn. She's on good terms with Saturn. But she said, if somebody tells me what to do, no. I like the role. She said, I like the roles when I make them. And I thought, that's brilliant. I'm not going to forget that, because that so describes that Aquarius energy. I like the roles when I
yeah.
make them.
Mhm.
So there is an idea among some astrologers, philosophically speaking, that if we embody these energies, we can manifest some of their positive attributes instead of get waylaid by them. And that kind of takes us back to the beginning of the podcast, Lisa, when you were talking about this being a really beautiful time to think about, what do you want to explore? Where do you want to take the risks? Where do you want to show up with more freedom? Where can you unshackle yourself, untether yourself? And maybe if we do that, we're less likely to have the car accident that takes us out of commission for 3 months while we've got our foot in the air with a cat.
Rick Levine says this thing about Uranus. He's like, bend your knees and shake your hips for Uranus so that you're in that position to navigate the changes that are coming with. And I always really liked that, partially because it reminds me of Tai Chi, which I did for a long time. And that's the stance that you take in Tai Chi in order to move the energy, which is what you were just speaking to, is to move the energy and having that stance of being ready and mobile instead of being rigid and stiff. See where you can loosen up your body and your life and metaphorically bend the knees in your life in order to have a ready stance and one that's open to the inspiration and maybe the uncomfortable changes that are headed your way.
I'm smiling because there's a dinosaur museum here in town and it has an
Huh.
earthquake simulator. And you stand on this thing and you've been there?
Yeah, I think that that was broken though, so we couldn't hear.
Yeah, that's a good image for me to hold with Uranus. I mean, in order to stay upright, you've got to really bend into those knees and let it move through you.
The more you try to resist it, the the harder it's going to be. In fact, my yoga teacher this morning was talking about our resistance to change and how when when you resist, it's just a lot more difficult. And I think that Uranus, like all of the outer planets, really illustrates that when you don't listen and are curious and ready to receive, even though it might not be what you think you want, that just being curious about what could this actually bring me that I'm not seeing at the moment? What gifts could they bring me?
Or,
And where are you stuck in your perception of the way that you think that your life needs to go?
you know how people talk about anxiety and excitement
Mhm.
feeling the same physically?
Yes.
It's
Very
very
Uranus.
much a Uranus thing. Yeah, this could
Yeah.
be a very exciting time, you know? If you look at it that way, if you allow that, if you take some risks, if you are willing to make some changes.
And I think part of the bending the knee, like in addition to the bending the knees, is the breathing is really important because anxiety so often gets stuck in your chest and you're breathing from the top part of your chest. And remembering to breathe all the way down and all the way up and doing the breathing exercises that helps to really tamper down your nervous system and bring it to a more livable state.
Oh.
So
This has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so
I
much. I would
know.
love to explore all the planets like this.
I think that's the plan.
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we've got more stuff to come in typical Uranus fashion. My husband had foot surgery on the full moon last week that was conjunct Uranus. He was like, "Is this a good time?" I was like, "Yeah, going to totally throw our life into a whirlwind. It's perfect. So
you're rolling with
I was like, sure, you could do it on that stable new moon, but why not just do it on this really crazy full moon? Because that's really the reality of what's going to play out here. So, and
until next time.
yes,
Keep breathing, bend
yeah.
your knees and shake your hips, and welcome some of that Uranian energy into your life.
So much love, everybody. I talk to you later. Bye. As always, thanks for listening to Broadcast Astrology Insight for Humans. And if you're so inclined, like, follow, and subscribe, and please don't be a stranger.
Signing off for now. Until next time, humans, keep your gaze upwards on the stars and be well. We look forward to sharing more soon.